Welcome to the Dialogue by Wirepoints, connecting the dots between our economy, government, and people. And now your hosts, Ted Dabrowski and Mark Glennon.
All right, thanks for joining us. This is our second podcast here at Wirepoints. My name is Ted Dabrowski. I'm the president of Wirepoints, and I'm here with Mark Glennon, who's our founder and executive editor. And today what we wanted to do is kind of hit probably the best measure of how tough things are in Illinois, and it's the fact that the state is shrinking. Illinois is losing more people to other states than virtually every other state in the country, except for maybe New York. We're one of just 3 states to shrink in the country in the last decade, and I guess it's probably the clear symptom of the dysfunction we have in Illinois. So that's why we want to tackle it first, because it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on in Illinois. If you understand and admit and acknowledge the fact that we're losing so many people, then we need to address our policies, because as we'll talk about, you can't have a functioning state if you're shrinking. And look, what we need to acknowledge first of all is that we have a great state. There's no doubt that this is one of the greatest states. It's sitting right in the middle of the country. It's got this great infrastructure hub. It's got these great universities. The talent pool is really good. We got the tech sector. We got the farmland. We got the lake. Most states would die to have what we have as a starting point for having a state where you can build prosperity for the people that live there and the businesses that live there. But we would argue that our politicians and our political class have totally forgotten that people can choose where they live. And if they're not happy with their prospects, with what they can get out of a state and, build their lives, they'll leave. And I think our politicians have also forgotten how to compete. Other states are competing with us for people and for talent and business. And what's fascinating about all this is that we'll talk to people, Mark, that say, population gains, losses, it doesn't really matter.
Well, let's address that first, Ted, because that's not a crazy position, in my opinion. I mean, it depends on what your values are, but I can understand why many people, if they don't follow these things closely, would say, come on, look, we got enough people. There's enough wealth here. Who cares if the economy doesn't grow quite as fast or if the population dwindles a little bit? And at the national level, quite a few people on the left have made that case expressly, that we worry too much about GDP growth and not as much as we should about the environment and other issues of equality and such. Whether you like that or not, for better or worse, the fact is that our system is built on growth. You cannot make the numbers work for our budget and for many aspects of our society unless you're getting economic growth. And you can start with the pensions, which are the largest part of our fiscal problem. They're premised on growth. Built into all their assumptions are increasing numbers of people coming into the system and other economic assumptions. Social Security, of course, is premised on growth for the country as a whole. The fact is that we have an economy that's basically like an airplane. Either you're moving forward, and there's air flowing over the wings, or the thing is going to drop. And, most devastating if you get people like Warren Buffett, probably the most famous investor in the world. He said, no way he'd put a new investment, a factory or something in Illinois because of our problems. He said they're coming for your money. They're going to ultimately tax anybody who's there. Well, if you get people like him not investing here, not coming here, our kids and people we love are going to end up going someplace else for those jobs. And we get into a downward spiral. So I would hope everybody should recognize that this is an important topic we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think maybe this is a good transition as to why people leave. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that, people who are upset with Illinois, they go straight to blaming taxes. And, taxes, I think that's too simplistic of an argument. There's a lot of people who will pay high taxes if they're getting good services. If they're getting a lot of value for the money they pay, then they'll stick around. But I think what's happening in Illinois is that taxes are high, but the services aren't good, and there's a lot of other problems as well. So we need to peel back the onion. And I like to say it this way, and I've said it many times. It's too expensive to live here. There are not enough good jobs, and our governments are too corrupt. And when you wrap that, kind of captures the whole thing. But you look at it, we do have the highest property taxes in the nation. We battle New Jersey. We go back and forth between number one and number two for that. Our overall tax burden is in the top 10 in the country when you add up all the state and local taxes. And so it is expensive, but then you throw things like if you're a Chicago resident, you throw in the crime, you throw in the bad schools and stuff like that. It's it adds up.
That the best illustration to your point about people being okay with higher taxes if they're getting value is our neighbor in Wisconsin. They're right up there at the top, ranked third or fourth or fifth on total tax burden. You don't hear a lot of complaining there, however, and businesses are quite happy to be there. Why? Because they trust the government. Their money's being honestly spent. It's stable. Teachers know they're going to get their pensions, even if they're a bit smaller than what you get in Illinois. So this isn't just an anti-tax story. It's much more than that, as you're saying.
Yeah. So as I was saying, you add in the crime, you add in the quality of the schools, the Chicago public schools, and there's enough reason for there to be lots of problems. We know that from the 2000 to 2010 census, almost 200,000 Blacks, African Americans left. I always forget if it's Chicago or Cook County, but it's 200,000 people, and they were going to Houston, to Dallas, to Atlanta. So it's lots of people leaving. Then of course you can add to that the jobs. We used to have a huge number of manufacturing jobs here in Illinois, and we've looked at the data not just in Illinois but across the country, and of course many of those jobs went to China or Mexico and things like that. But a lot of states recovered their manufacturing jobs. We didn't, and so you've got a problem of not enough good paying jobs. And I always like to throw in there, our governments are too corrupt. We've got the most units of government in the country, nearly 7,000 units, far more than the states around us, and certainly on a per capita basis, far more than the big states. So we've got too many chances for corruption. And when you feel like you're getting hit on paying a lot, and your governments are corrupt, and you're not getting the services, well, that's a good reason to leave. And, it's also, Mark, you and I were talking, it's also a good reason not to come to Illinois. This is not only about people leaving. It's, if you give too many excuses for people not to come in, and we've seen that the numbers have been horrific on people not coming into the country, into the state.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because some people are spinning these numbers. Ted, it turned out that for the decade as a whole, as shown in the recent census, the total shrinkage here was 18,000 people, which doesn't sound like a lot. And it was not consistent with earlier estimates. Every year, the Census Bureau comes out with population estimates. And if you added them all up for the last 10 years, it would have been a far more severe loss. But you got to look beyond the top line. First of all, we're one of only two states that shrank. And so even a flat picture would be hard on us, very hard on us, for the reasons we explained earlier. But also you got to get into those components. So it's made up of people leaving, people coming in, international migration, and births and deaths. So why don't we walk through that a little bit, Ted? Because you emphasize the one that is the alarm bell, really, which is the number of people leaving. And we'll never know how many people and how many companies, how many employers might have moved here, but for our problems.
Yeah, let me break those numbers down. Before I do, I just want to share one thing that not to forget, because people love to blame the weather as one of the key reasons for leaving. And for sure, there's a lot of people who leave because it's cold here, right? And certainly if you're a retiree, you may want to leave. But what we saw just in the gross numbers, Mark, you mentioned that we lost 18,000 people. Well, all of our neighbors grew in the last decade. Indiana grew by 300,000 people. So, Wisconsin by 200,000 people. So we're talking about cold weather states. They grew. Michigan grew by 200,000 people. So they were able to bring in people where we weren't. And so that's an important point. So, what do we look at when we talk about population losses? There's like you said, three factors to that growth, and that's you've got births, it's basically they call it the I'm forgetting the term now, the normal increase, but you got your births minus deaths. And we've always been pretty good at births in the country, and we've collapsed in the last 20 years. So our births are down a lot, and maybe that's because younger people are leaving. That's our speculation. Our international immigration has collapsed in half in the last decade. So we're losing out on people coming in, and then the people moving between states. We've lost. We've basically lost enough people moving to other states to wipe out any benefit of the births and the international immigration. We wiped it out, which is why we shrunk.
Ted, it's important to interject here too. I imagine that some people would say, well, this is why we need to be very welcoming to even undocumented immigrants. But the census numbers do reflect and did count undocumented workers. And there was a very aggressive push to get them counted. They were required by law to be counted. As you may remember, there was a controversy about whether to include them and litigation with the Trump administration. But they were counted, so that is reflected. Their inclusion is in that net loss of population that we had.
Yeah, and some people think that the 18,000 loss in population we had over the last decade is really, it was really much bigger than that. Governor Pritzker's administration spent nearly $50 million to really push this 2020 census in a way that maybe stops it from being an apples to apples comparison with 2010, where there wasn't such a big push. So perhaps the 18,000 loss, maybe would have been bigger, but of course we'll never know. But that's, I think, a question mark hanging out there.
What do you see, Ted, right now for trends in Chicago in particular? We know that African Americans have been the largest group leaving, but all groups are leaving. It's important not to lose track of the breadth of this. And we can see that in the IRS numbers too, which you've done a lot of work with.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So we have the census data, which is where they go out and actually survey people, right? They go door to door and do as many surveys as they can to figure things out. And so, some people criticize it as not being perfect, and it's a survey, so you get the results that you get. We have another interesting set of facts, and I prefer these only because they're very factual. And the Internal Revenue Service, they actually, what's interesting about every time we file a tax return is we say where we live and how many kids are, how many people are in our family and how much money we make. So the IRS knows exactly where you are each year, and they can track who's moving from one state to the other by a change in address. They can see which states are gaining income and which states are losing income because they see who's moving from where to where. And so their data is very concrete. And, I never knew this about the IRS and how they might track us until I started tracking this stuff. It's really scary on the one hand, but interesting on the other. But what it does do, it gives you very concrete data, and you can actually count the number of people who have moved one way or the other, how much money they make, and which states are winning and losing. And what's fascinating there, no surprise, Illinois is the big loser all the time for several decades now. Just competing really with New York for its losses of people and income.
So every year they release anonymized data, aggregating it, so you can go into it's a little tough to do. We've done that and put it in graph form and tried to simplify it and add it all up over, let's say, since the year 2000. How much income, Ted, have we lost? You got that exact number, I think, that you.
Yeah, we got it's so like you say, every year when we lose those people, they take their incomes with them. And so we have people coming into Illinois, people leaving Illinois, and we calculate the net. And each year we're losing about 75,000 people a year on average. And, we're losing some $2 to $3 to $4 to $6 billion of taxable income that they take with them on a net basis. So when you accumulate all of these losses year after year after year after year over the last 20 years, it's now $468 billion that could have been taxed had we just stayed even, had we just kept our people here on a net zero change in population or in migration. And we're talking about billions of dollars more in taxable funds that the state could have had to fund education or to keep our taxes down. How about that? To make our roads better.
And that's the sum of the adjusted gross income as shown on people's tax returns that they reported from another state after they left here. That's a huge number. And keep in mind that when those people leave, what else are they taking with them? They're spending their business, their contributions to schools and churches and whatever else. The impact of that is really quite staggering when you think about that number and the secondary effects that it's had.
Let me share a story. I've got a friend who left Illinois. I guess it's probably been 3 years now. He was waiting for his kids to get old enough. He's still a young guy, but he's waiting for his kids to get out of high school. And he lived in the North Shore. He had a house that's probably close to, he's done well for himself, a financial advisor, and it had a house in the 1 point something million, close to $2 million. And he lost his faith in Illinois years ago, and he said he didn't trust the government. He saw his property taxes were almost $30,000 a year, and he just found that crazy. And he started to look around, and he got enticed by the Colorado area, somewhere out in the Denver area, and he ended up buying a property about the same, maybe a little bit less, but about the same value, 6 acres on the side of a mountain. Beautiful pictures that I saw. And his property taxes were like $3,500. Basically, he said he did the math. He said, look, I can continue to pay $30,000 here in Illinois, and it's only going to go up based on the pension problems and other problems we have here. Or I can move to that area and save about $27,000 a year. He said, if I take that money and invest it for the next 20 years at 6% on average, it turned out to be $1 million. And that's a calculation he did. He said, look, why would I give $1 million in a government where I don't trust them and I know the taxes are only going up? And he left. He left, and his money's gone, his talent is gone, his family's gone.
And those folks do that calculation, Ted. When you go through those numbers, the IRS numbers that we've seen, it's all income groups that are leaving. So on the surface, it looks like, well, these are mostly poor middle class people leaving, but there are wealthy people in there, and they do take a hugely disproportionate amount of wealth away with them. And you're right, they do the calculation. I used to work in venture capital and worked with some of the people who had done extremely well in life and were very wealthy. And I've had conversations with them where they say, look, I can stay here and pay income taxes to the state government and all the other taxes here, or I can go to Florida and have tens of millions of dollars more to contribute to the philanthropic work that I want to do with the rest of my life. And most of the ultra wealthy people do become pretty philanthropic later in life. That becomes a pretty easy decision when you don't trust the government. And that's the situation we have here. We've
mentioned a couple wealthy people here, but I think it's the same calculation. It may not be that, spreadsheet oriented, but it's the estimations that people do, even if they're, have lesser incomes. And, I was in Atlanta and I wrote about this story. I was in Atlanta for a funeral and I went to get a haircut to look presentable. And the lady that cut my hair was a woman from Illinois, from Collinsville. And I said, "Oh, what are you doing down here?" And she said, I had a beauty shop in Collinsville, and I wasn't. The situation, the economic situation was dire. Nothing was going on, and I kept coming down to Atlanta, and it was vibrant, and there's a lot of entrepreneurs, and I was welcome. She's an African American lady, and she says I was welcome here. They wanted my business here, so she said I picked up and moved. And she was thriving down there. And she said that she didn't miss Illinois because it just wasn't welcoming for entrepreneurs and for growing a business.
Yeah, that's right. And there are voices on the left that I wish would be heard more, Ted. We've written about this too. Those who think that for poorer people in the worst neighborhoods, moving is exactly what they should do. It's rational, and it's not a harsh thing to do. So there's a program in the state of Washington where they actually encouraged people to move out of the bad neighborhoods when it came to providing them with housing assistance and such. Axios which is a left-leaning publication, had a long story on this. So encouraging people to move, to get away from the crime, the taxes, go to places where there's more opportunity is entirely rational. And that's what many people are doing at the low end of the income scale. Lori Lightfoot, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, however, is going to save us, though, isn't she? She's run an ad in Texas explaining to Texas businesses why they'd be smart to move to Illinois. What do you think about that, Ted?
Yeah, it's one of those where, it's all a question of whether she's virtue signaling or whether she's serious. She's trying to get Texas companies and people to move to Chicago. And, if you look at the data, in the last decade, Texas was the biggest grower of population. From 2010 to 2020, Texas grew by 4 million people, right? We compare that to Illinois shrinking by 18,000. It's a night and day. And people are moving there because that's where they're finding opportunity, jobs, investment. It's hot. And I think you were down there. You said you saw all those cranes in, I think it was the Dallas area. It's ludicrous to think that she's pitching a lot of these, equity-based policies and things like that as things that are going to attract people here. But, people need to be able to find their economic future there. They need to take care of their families. And, Chicago isn't doing that. It's actually doing the exact opposite. And we haven't talked about that now, but the last year and a half and the destruction, policy-wise, and of course, the riots and the crime and all that, and the schools. It's hard to figure out where Chicago goes from here, but that's probably a whole story in and of itself.
Yeah, Ted, I used to live in Texas, and that was 25 years ago, but it's really unrecognizable when you go back there now because there is so much construction. I was in both Dallas and Austin, and there parts of the cities are totally transformed. And I do stay in contact with quite a few people down there. They find it just laughable that Chicago thinks it's going to be attracting Texas companies to move there. Texas has problems, by the way, and there could be companies moving out of Texas because of those problems. They're not going to come to Illinois, I can assure you. They're going to look for the things that took them to Texas in the first place, which was a very business-friendly, dynamic environment that you just don't see in many places.
Yeah, I think, Mark, just to wrap up, Illinois can't succeed as long as it has a lot of these failed policies. And I think it behooves everybody on both sides of the aisle to think about this differently. And, I wasn't a big fan of the people who ran for mayor last time around, but Bill Daley said something that I think was one of the most attractive things I've heard somebody say as to how to approach Chicago and, of course, Illinois. He said he wanted to think about how do we grow Chicago's population by 300,000. That was kind of the objective. And that was interesting because it's a totally different kind of thinking. We need to think about policies that we should think about are these policies going to keep people in Illinois, or are they going to chase people away? Are they going to keep people in Chicago or chase them away? And, he was suggesting that we need to think about policies that bring people here. I think we've forgotten about that competition that, as I mentioned, that we need to think about states versus states. We're losing that competition. And this is a great state. And, at Wirepoints, this is why we do the work we do. We don't point out these problems because we like to. We point out these problems because they're a symptom of a lot of bad policies. And we'd love to see this state be one of the booming states in the country. It's got all the assets. It's got all the attributes it needs. And, there's no reason why we're not a top 5, top 10 growth state in this country.
And I think fixing it, Ted, takes us back to I think those first 2 points that we made. A lot of people just don't see this as an issue that we're shrinking. And a lot of people have been dismissing the seriousness of the numbers. 18,000 people over a decade, that's no big deal. Big mistake. If you haven't even recognized the problem, there's going to be no correction for it. And that's the first hurdle we have to overcome.
I think you've nailed it right there. If you don't understand if you can't diagnose the problem right, you'll never fix it. So with that, thank you very much. Thanks for joining Wirepoints on our second podcast. And we look forward to sharing more of our thoughts with you in the future.